Hello everyone, it's the expatriate Amerikaner. I'm joining you from my overseas hidden undisclosed location where a couple new notes just came in. I picked these up, they were in circulation. I'm just kidding, these notes were definitely not in circulation. I've been out of circulation for a long time. Top note is a United States note, series 1917, given to me, donated to me by my wife. And her dad actually had it in his possession. He's from the former east side of Germany. I have no idea how he got this note because the wall was standing his entire life. So it must have been given to him by like his mom or grandma, or I have no idea. Bottom note is a series 1898, an act of 1898 silver certificate that was given to me by my mother. The top note, I really like the design here. It has kind of a Confederate flag feel to it, style to it. It's a $1 United States note printed directly by the Treasury. Back then, notes that were in existence were either Federal Reserve notes. Federal Reserve notes came into existence in 1913 during the implementation of the Federal Reserve Act, which allowed the Federal Reserve Bank, a private bank, and then also controlled by or made up of private banks to issue the currency in the US, and the currency that was based upon debt. The United States is always in debt, the government is in debt even back then, and it allowed the Federal Reserve to issue its money, and instead of just doing that directly through the Treasury, debt-free, the Federal Reserve was able to wiggle itself in and ended up taking basically long-term control of the entire United States banking and monetary system. But back then there were still United States notes running around that were printed directly by the Treasury. I'm going to read the back to you here. It's very interesting here on the right-hand side. It says, "This note is a legal tender." Doesn't say note, it just says, "This note is a legal tender at its face value for all debts, public and private, except duties on imports and interest on the public debt." That's very telling right there. It explains to you that these are Treasury notes basically, and they cannot be used to pay off the debt. So up until 1913, there was no Federal Reserve and there was no notes being issued against indebtedness. I think it's indebtedness or indebtedness. I don't know how to say that word. Let's continue. It says counterfeiting or altering this note or passing any counterfeit or alteration note or having in possession any false or counterfeit plate or impression of it or any paper made in imitation of the paper on which it is printed is felony and is punishable by $5,000 fine or 15 years imprisonment at hard labor or both. So even just having like a fake note by accident, you could have been facing a fine of up to $5,000 and being sent to a like hard labor camp where you would probably be making big stones into smaller stones. So they took counterfeiting back then really seriously. It was actually printed on the back of notes what the punishment was. And that's, like I said, over here where that kind of red or brown, either rust or blood stain is. So that's pretty interesting. That explains the rules on counterfeiting. Like I said, that's with George Washington on the front. The bottom note here is a, like I said, silver certificate. It says, "This certifies that there has been deposited in the Treasury of the United States of America one silver dollar." There was an act of 1898 that, the dollars that were printed here were based and backed up by actual silver dollars that were deposited in the Treasury. And you could actually take this note to Washington, D.C., to the Treasury, and you could turn this in and get your silver dollar back then. It wouldn't even be possible anymore if you went there. They would tell you that it's no longer honored and that this, even though it's still $1 and still valid as a dollar, it's not backed by silver anymore because the U.S. is no longer a country that backs its money with silver or gold. And it would be nice if they did, but it's not the case. And on the back, it just says here, small, "This certificate is receivable for customs, taxes, and all public dues, and when so received may be reissued." So you can basically, upon receiving it, use it again. And this one can be actually used for customs. It doesn't say duties, it just says customs, taxes, and dues. So I'm assuming that you could probably use this one maybe for imports. It doesn't say that you can't, so would be interesting to look that up. These are 2 notes that are in my collection, like I said, and I think that they're really interesting in comparison to the older notes. They're much, much larger. You can see that here, that they're maybe about, yeah, I would say at least a third larger, maybe 40% larger than common standard modern Federal Reserve notes. So just the size of them is pretty impressive, how they look, the design, how the plates were designed. I love the eagle on the front here. You can see the Capitol in the background with the flag that he's holding, and they just have like a real elegant, regal feel to them. So this is one of my favorite parts of my collection. Thank you for watching, and I hope to show you some other cool notes.